welcome back to another episode of What Do You Do? Conversations in Public Policy. My name is Matthew Hurt, and I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by a special guest, Mark Mix. Mark, what do you do?
Well, Matthew, first of all, thanks for the invitation. And that's a difficult question because we do a lot of things. First and foremost, I'm a husband of 34 years. I'm a father of 6 children, and that's my primary occupation. My vocation, however, is working for the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, 2 organizations whose mission is to protect individual workers from the evils of compulsory forced unionism, which unfortunately is a problem in the American economy and something that came back through the 1930s that was imposed on all the states. So it's a real privilege for me to help individual workers who want to exercise their rights in the American workplace vis-a-vis unionism.
Well, talk a little bit about the history of the Right to Work movement and how this organization really came on the scene and began to help workers, like you just said.
Yeah, indeed. Going back to the 1930s in the Roosevelt administration, the transition between Hoover to Roosevelt, we had a financial crisis. And as you know, Matthew, better than most, that politicians will never let a good crisis go to waste. And so if you have a crisis, government immediately fills the vacuum and says, we've got to do something about this. And in 1931, 32, 33, there was a financial crisis in America. And so Franklin Roosevelt took that opportunity to dramatically expand federal power over the states. I mean, obviously the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution have specific, restrictions on federal infringement on states' rights. That's all gone, all fine and good. It's nice to read about it, but the actual implementation is problematic. And so in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt proposed a dramatic change in labor policy, basically saying that the federal government will take over the regulation of labor management relations for private sector workers in America, which before that was kind of a states' rights issue. States had the ability to experiment with policies that would attract capital, attract workers, et cetera. But Roosevelt used this crisis to dramatically expand his power, federal power over the states. And so the first bill was a bill called the National Industrial Recovery Act, which was this federal imposition of federal regulations on the private sector. And it passed the House, passed the Senate. Roosevelt signed it. The Supreme Court overruled it as unconstitutional. It was probably clear thinking by the court saying, hey, you don't belong here. The Congress hasn't given you the authority to do this. It's not a proper place for you to be. So Roosevelt immediately retracted. Within 2 weeks, they had another bill called the Wagner Act that was introduced in 1935. That bill was passed by the House and by the Senate. And interestingly enough, Matthew, this was one of those moments where the idiom of a switch in time saved 9 saved the United States Supreme Court going from 9 members to 15. As you know, and the listeners hopefully know, that Article 3 doesn't stipulate the size of the Supreme Court. It simply says under Article 1 that the Congress will create the court, the Supreme Court will exist, but the number of members is not articulated in the Constitution. So Roosevelt had solid ground to actually expand the numbers of justices, but after he kind of convinced the Chief Justice, Charles Evan Hughes, that it was probably worthwhile to get an associate justice for every justice that was over 70 years old, which would have meant 6 new justices. Chief Justice Hughes and Justice Roberts switched their votes, and they sided with the 3 musketeers against the 4 horsemen at the time, and the Wagner Act was upheld as constitutional. And so from that point forward, in 1937 till today, union officials have had this federal power that's imposed on the states to force workers at the time to physically join and formally join a labor union, and then to add insult to injury, force them to pay those dues to the union that's been granted this exclusive monopoly power over them. So it's been in place for almost 90 years now. I guess if I do my math correctly, I think we're at 90-some years. And it's something that the Right to Work Committee has been battling since 1955. Because in 1947, when the Congress saw the damage that had been done to the private sector workplace, the dramatic expansion of union power, their control over the coal industry and other industries, literally shutting down the economy during that period from 1937 to 1947, Congress came back and said, hey, we need to do something about this. Instead of repealing it and sending it back to the states, they passed what is known as the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. And one little section of that Taft-Hartley Act says that states, if they can, by affirmative vote, can overrule the federal imposition of forced unionism. Those are known as right-to-work laws. Today, 26 states have right-to-work laws. The committee has been around since 1955, formed by 5 employees in the railway industry, industry that said, hey, we don't want to pay dues to this union and won't even represent us. And some small business people. The foundation came around in 1968. Our job is to litigate for individual employees at the foundation side. So that's kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of the right to work movement.
That's really exciting stuff, and it's an issue I think that not a lot of people think about when you think about the hot button issues going on in Washington. But this is it's critically important. I come from a right to work state. I grew up in a right to work state. I'm currently in a right to work state. Yep. We'll see how that goes. But it really, as my dad grew up as an electrician, he worked for an electrical utility. I do remember his interactions with the unions there, and especially their political activity. Yeah. So this movement, this organization has been around for now 70 years, yep. And you got involved. But tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into this?
Yeah, well, thank you, Matthew. I grew up in Western New York, in the extreme western portion of New York State. In fact, my home in Virginia today is closer to my former home in New York, where my mom lives, than where my mom lives to New York City. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy. When you think of, oh yeah, I'm from New York, well, everyone assumes you're from the city. I'm not. I'm from a rural county called Allegheny County, where the head count between cows and individuals is probably pretty close. I mean, there's a lot of dairy farming, some industry that's mostly gone now from New York, but it was a really great place to grow up. I grew up in a small town, little town called Alfred, New York, which has a private college and a state school there. So the population is driven by basically the academic communities there. The rest of it, when you get outside Alfred, I lived in the suburbs of Alfred. Alfred's 842 people when the students aren't there. I lived in the suburbs in a place called Alfred Station, where there's about maybe 75 people in main Alfred Station. So it was a small town. We knew everybody. It was a great place to grow up. My stepfather was a 32-year member of the Machinists Union, like your family, not IBEW, but IAM. And he was a welder at a manufacturing facility that's now gone in Western New York. And so I remember a strike in 1976, I think it was, that he was out for a couple weeks and never really understood labor policy. My mom was a waitress at a truck stop and then washed dishes in a school cafeteria. Today, well, now he's retired, but my brother was a fourth grade teacher in the government school system in New York. And so I have exposure to the NEA and to the AFT and to the IAM and to the CSEA, these unions. And I really didn't pay much attention, Matthew, until I kind of moved out of that area and got to a place called James Madison University here in Virginia. And believe it or not, this is a true story and one that just kind of shake your head about. I didn't know anybody when I got there. I literally knew no one at the school. And how I got there, I won't tell the story. It's kind of obscure, but it's a fun story. But suffice to say, the first day when classes started, I was walking to the student union, and there was one guy that was standing in front of a table saying, "Hey, we've got a meeting tonight. Why don't you come?" And sure enough, it was the College Republican meeting, and sure enough, that guy out in front of the table had been trained at a Leadership Institute youth leadership school to be in front of the table to engage with me. And if it hadn't been for that handshake and for that guy, we wouldn't be here today. I'm sure of that, Matthew. So the Leadership Institute played a really formative role in my political process. Not only did I learn about issues, including this one, but I learned a lot about kind of who we are as a country. I learned a lot about just the idealism of the grand experiment in self-government at James Madison, and ended up getting into the political world there. But again, it was a Leadership Institute graduate that really kind of pulled me into this, and I sure am glad for it.
That's pretty exciting. I also discovered Leadership Institute on my college campus at Middle Tennessee State University. I was plugged into politics already, but needed an outlet, and that's something that Leadership Institute has been doing for decades, dispatching young activists on college campuses to identify, recruit, train, and then mobilize young people. Many people think that most college students are liberal, but the truth of the matter is most college students are apathetic. And when they find something, and it was was there a social element?
Of course.
The guy said, "Hey, come to the meeting tonight," and you didn't know anybody. We hear that story so many times. Somebody who's moved from another area, their first day on campus or first week on campus, and young people want to get to know somebody who is kind of like them. Yeah. Were your parents political at all?
No, I was kind of a blank piece of paper, a blank canvas, if you will, when I finally got there. I was, playing softball and drinking beer and working at a 2 2-aisle grocery store that sold beer, and working at a ceramic factory, and midnight to 8 on weekends in a lot of instances. Worked at a bookstore, did lots of things before I got into college, and still when I was my first 2 years, I spent at a state university getting my associate's degree. I still had those jobs and had great experience, but no, I was really apolitical. I cared more about the softball game on Wednesday night or the weekend, and maybe drinking a beer or two, something like that. My kids are watching this. I'm a little bit embarrassed, but anyway, that's what it was. I was a blank slate, and it wasn't until this happened that my arc changed, and a couple of people that had invested in public policy and kind of ideas about liberty and freedom that got into me, and I started going to these meetings and got to contrast it to what I thought I knew. My high school teacher, interestingly enough, was very liberal. I mean, but I didn't know. I had no measuring device to say that all the things he was talking about were right. I took a special interest in kind of social studies and civics and that kind of thing. That was kind of something I focused on. I was in the student government and those types of things in school. But it wasn't until I got to James Madison that I finally kind of got a better picture of a full orb view of, well, not quite full orbed. I'm still learning today, as we all are. But it was more of a view about how the world worked and what was working and what wasn't.
So you go from a state school, or you get your associate's degree, and then you're at James Madison, and you're thinking about what are the next steps. And as you've just said, Mark, you took on a few professional responsibilities, jobs perhaps in high school and during your education, trying to figure out what you like. Where did you land after graduation?
Yeah, well, that arc, I was in between of all these. I was selling retail seeds for a seed company. I got to go to Mississippi and Alabama and Florida and Georgia, and then one summer I did Long Island, all the way out from Montauk Point, all the way into the city and into Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and learned a lot about America. I hadn't traveled much growing up. I think I'd been out of New York State maybe 3 times in my life before I ended up at James Madison, and that was kind of a part of, if I hadn't been selling seeds, I wouldn't have found James Madison. But yeah, what happened was when I graduated, this friend that shook my hand, a Leadership Institute training guy, said, "Hey, why don't you come work with me on a political campaign?" So I worked in Virginia's 1st District, America's 1st District, then represented by Congressman Herb Bateman, who literally was a congressman who actually read the bills. They write these books about, hey, you think we read these bills? Well, a lot of them don't, and certainly 5,000-page bills I don't. But Herb Bateman was a true legislator, Republican, and he was in a very tough race in 1986 down in Newport News, Hampton, Pocosin, that area, all the way Caroline County, et cetera. And he was running against Bobby Scott, who's a current congressman. Okay. And Bobby Scott was a hard-charging challenger, and the race was up in the air, and everyone thought Herb was going to get beat. Congressman Bateman, was going to get beat. And the Leadership Institute guy and myself, we were responsible for the field activities. And we turned out, I think it was something like 61% of the vote in 1986, when the national turnout was something like 38%. I mean, those numbers are a little bit vague to me now. Sure. But all of a sudden, after we did that, we get a call from the Leadership Institute and say, "Hey, why don't you come, train?" And so we went to a legislative project management school. I put my name into the Leadership Institute's Job and Talent Bank then. What's it called now?
Which is conservativejobs.com right
Okay,
now.
It was Job and Talent Bank then. And I got this resume, and the people from Right to Work called me and said, "We'd like to meet with you." I said, "Well, what the heck is Right to Work?" And kind of got filled in on that, and went to the Briar Patch with a bunch of guys. We all got hired. We ended up going out to New Mexico in December of 1986, and that's kind of, Matthew, that's the arc of my work. I spent 5 years traveling the country, and what a blessing that was. I mean, getting out and meeting people, seeing small business people and individuals that fight for liberty and freedom every day, and interacting with them and being involved in the legislative process and the election process, and just with a suitcase in hand, traveling from one state to the next, doing jobs, and then finally coming back here in 1990. So that was kind of it. And then since 1990, I've been here. As I said, I got married. I got a mortgage. I got 6 kids, and now I don't know if it's the Peter principle that you get elevated to a point where you can do no harm, but now I have the privilege of kind of being the president of both. Well, I am the president of both the foundation and the committee, and so that's kind of my story from then to now.
Well, and I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about both the seed sales and this campaign experience. Again, some people who are listening to this who watch this they're not sure where they want to go, and a lot of times college or trade school or those years after high school, a place where you kind of explore what you want to do when you grow up, and some of us are still exploring that. So I'm wondering what were some of the lessons you took from either or both of the sales jobs job.
Yeah.
And what were some of the things you saw about organizing on the ground in such an important race, that campaign experience that you got? What are some of the lessons you could pull out of that?
Well, I think probably the biggest lesson, Matthew, and this is self-deprecating a little bit, is just being there, being able to work, being able to commit, and doing what you're charged to do, doing it the best way you possibly can. And whether it's the simple job of, pounding rebar into the ground to put up a campaign sign, or drive a congressman and his wife to the next event, or hand out balloons and candy at a parade, all those things that you do and get an opportunity to give you a kind of wisdom and as you learn. And obviously, to your point, I'm still looking to be what I'm going to do when I grow up. We'll figure that out. But it is something that, again, was just kind of innate, was if you're asked to do something, do it well and work hard at it. I mean, Matthew, your work with the Arlington County Republicans is a great example of that. I mean, you get I've gotten my teeth kicked in legislatively and electorally probably more than you have at this point. You'll grow into it. But what you do, and working so hard just to make sure that people understand what's going on, doing that and doing your best at it, it's what I learned from every job that I've ever had. I mean, you always get more responsibility if you're responsible for what you were given in the first place.
What I have found, Mark, is, and you're exactly right, as I look, we've got an intern class here at Leadership Institute 3 times a year. There are plenty of interns who especially come in the summer who intern at places like the Heritage Foundation or Cato Institute or Media Research Center, a lot of our great partner organizations that we work alongside. And one of the most important things, and you've said it, is showing up and being reliable.
Yeah.
And also, I think, taking on a challenge that you didn't know existed. Growing up outside Nashville, Tennessee, for me, I did not know this world of politics existed to the extent that it could pay the rent, or it could help me save for the future. And one of the things that I always liked doing in high school and college was writing. I wrote for my high school newspaper. I wrote editorial content for my college paper. And I parlayed that in my early career into direct mail fundraising copy. And so it's I think some of the stuff that you've talked about, that organizing experience, the sales experience, probably helps you today in what you've done. So talk a little bit about, of all the issues that are out there, and our listeners I'm sure they're fired up about one or more issues, but this right to work issue, I think, is really an important issue that goes under the current of most political conversations. Yeah. Talk a bit about how you were attracted to that issue and how you landed at right to work.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. You made the point in the introduction, Matthew, that the idea of right to work not being one of those kind of marquee issues that flashes on the screen outside the theater every night. It's one of these ones that's kind of under the radar to a large degree, because some people would think it's untenable that you'd force someone to formally join an organization and pay money in order to get a job. In fact, 8 out of 10 Americans believe it's wrong to do that. But as you know, at the Leadership Institute, being right is not enough. We owe it to our philosophy to learn how to win. And I think I'm quoting that almost directly, but you correct me if I'm not. I'm paraphrasing at best. But that's what this is all about, is this issue of forced unionism. I mean, first of all, organized labor is about a $30 billion a year business. And we know that every 2 years, when we just take the reports that they file that are fairly limited in what their political exposure is, they spend almost $2 billion a year, or every 2 years, on elections and lobbying. That is a pretty big political powerhouse. And unfortunately for them, they've come to basically rely on government power for their privilege. Instead of going out and selling a product to workers saying, hey, if you join us, we'll represent you on the shop floor, we'll do these great things for you, we'll focus on the shop floor instead of what's happening in state capitals in Washington, D.C., and make sure that you're protected and your voice is heard, those kinds of things. I mean, they would probably say, well, that's what we do, but they also play politics. In fact, we got just a great example of that in this last election when Donald Trump was elected. In the private sector, we know from exit polls that a majority of union households and union members voted for Donald Trump. Yet the money that flowed into the Democrat Party, and specifically Kamala Harris, was overwhelmingly one-sided. And that is kind of the essence of where we are. And that's what I've learned about in the years that I've dealt with at Right to Work, the people that call in and ask about this very thing. How can I be forced to support causes and ideas that I'm opposed to? I think Thomas Jefferson said it best: to compel someone to pay for things that they neither support or agree to is sinful and tyrannical. And that's what brought me into this, as I learned more about it out there in the field when I learned about right to work, when I was traveling around the country, and I got to meet people that were real constituents. These people, we have a chairman of our board who is a 34-year kindergarten teacher who had to pay dues to teach kindergartners, and she objected to it. Every year she had to fight. When you meet people like that have that type of courage and commitment, it leaves a mark. And it says, I have to do the best to defend those people. And literally, at the Right to Work Foundation, we've argued 18 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of, in many cases, one individual, Matthew, who had the courage to stand up and fight. And what a privilege that is, to be part of that, and part of that of helping someone like that has that courage to exercise their rights and to win their rights and protect their rights. And that learning process continues to this day. We get phone calls. We're representing right now we have over 200 active cases on behalf of workers right now across the country at the Right to Work Foundation. And fortunately, because people like you write really well, they don't use ChatGPT. They can write direct mail copy, and that's a great skill for anyone who's watching. Learn how to write. It is really critical in everything we do. But raising the money to be able to provide these resources to workers for free is it's just so gratifying. And it's not an occupation, it's a passion now. It really is. And I think that's another part of, if you find something you love, do it, and do it with passion. But do find something you love to do, because otherwise, you end up switching around. I've been with Right to Work, I guess, now going on 39 years, and I'm a dinosaur in this culture now, I think, right? But it's been really rewarding, and learning more about individual freedom and liberty in the workplace is something that I continue to do today, and it's just a privilege.
One of the things that I picked up on, Mark, is you mentioned the board member who is a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
I think so many people go out, they identify something they like doing or they're good at doing, or some combination of both, and most people just want to create their vision of the American dream. Some people want to raise a family. Some people want to retire with a lot of money and travel. Some people want to do, whatever they want to do. And what you've said is that there is an industry for perhaps millions of Americans that cuts in to their piece of the American dream, their piece of the pie.
Yeah.
And I think visualizing, you talk about the issues that people could care about. This is such a critically important issue because it cuts right into the family budget. It cuts into somebody's ability to achieve self-actualization and achieve what they can be, their purpose, and how they can provide for themselves or for their posterity, which is really part of the American dream. Yeah. So getting into, now you've been at National Right to Work Committee and Legal Defense Foundation for 39 years.
Something like that, yeah. I know I don't look that old, so thank you for that compliment.
Yeah, you're a young-looking guy, and you're so high energy. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you in for this conversation, because you are so excited about the stuff that you guys do, the important work that you guys do. I want to dig into the day-to-day a little bit if I can. So, we've got, at Leadership Institute, we have, 100-plus full-time staff, and they're all doing different things. I'm in the office sometimes. You do a little bit of travel. Talk a little bit about talk a bit about your work day and what that looks like.
Well, it usually starts early. Like this morning, I was on the radio at 6:05 a.m. and talking about issues that are relevant in Virginia today. I know that this will be dated, but we're talking a day before Election Day in Virginia, I believe. That's right. So, that, and then 2 more interviews, doing a TV interview at 7:30, and then another one at 8 o'clock, and then a staff meeting on Mondays with our committee staff, and then running around doing things, talking to donors, thanking donors, doing correspondence. But now my job really is to travel. I travel a lot and meet with folks that make it possible for us to do our work. And that really is gratifying. I recommend that if you get a chance to get out and meet people, you need to do that, Matthew. I see you shaking your head. And when you meet people that are of the same mind and have the courage to stand up to fight for America and fight for liberty and independence and individual rights, it just encourages it every day. I come back on the weekends and it's like I'm refreshed again after talking to people and watching what people build, what people protect, what they, we have many small businesses where we get to go see people that have built, started out in their garage and build a business business. The next thing you know, they've got 100 employees, and it's second generation, third generation. And, when the unions come and say, hey, we're going to tell you how to run your business, they get really exercised about that. And being able to help their employees, most importantly, we don't help employers, we help employees. Being able to do that is so gratifying, and it does recharge you every week. And I think, if you're going to be in public policy, go meet the constituents that are that you're helping. Like you're meeting people that you've trained that end up in the House of Delegates or in the House of Representatives or members of the United States Congress, for example, with Leadership Institute. I don't know if you had a president of the United States that graduated. I don't think yet, but you got
Not
a vice
yet.
president maybe.
We do.
Yeah, that trained and was trained by the Leadership Institute. You got senators and congressmen and lots of others who make a difference in the country. And it's that kind of passion for this that really drives you and keeps you going and keeps you motivated. And getting out into the country and meeting people is really a big part of that, for sure.
And so to that end, at National Right to Work Committee, there are kinds of travel jobs that aren't the guy who runs the organization. And again, I think about this program that we're doing here. I want people to think about the kinds of jobs they can go out and do with the skills or the interest level. What are some of those travel jobs that exist specifically at National Right to Work?
Yeah, well, we have a field team that goes out and they help, they testify in state legislatures. They help mobilize grassroots across the state. For example, if we have an offensive or defensive battle, we track probably anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 bills each legislative session. We take action on somewhere between 400 and 600 pieces of legislation. And if we're in a state where there's a serious problem, we send teams in there to talk to legislators, encourage them, give them information, help them gather information about issues that are important. And so there's that field work issue. Then we have a kind of a sales team, I will tell you. We send them out. We train them how to learn about our product, how to sell the right to work issue, to convince people that it's worth supporting. To your point, Matthew, to see how it impacts all the rest of the things that maybe are on the marquee screen.
Sure.
When you think about unions spending literally $2 billion every 2 years on politics, those people are sitting in state legislatures, they're sitting in the United States Congress, and they're pushing an agenda which would expand forced unionism. So being out there talking to people about this and convincing them that fighting on this issue of forced unionism is really fighting against what I can perceive and what others, Morton Blackwell would say, is kind of the engine or the gasoline of the social movement in the country, the progressive movement in the country, because organized labor is in politics in a huge way. And so we have positions where we send people out for that. Everybody kind of gets trained about how to sell the issue, and then they have a day job too. They're working in correspondence, they're working in legislative tracking here in our headquarters, they're working in our mail shop down in Virginia Beach, our print shop down in Virginia Beach. We've got a lot of things going on down there. So lots of opportunities to get involved. I mean, I got started, as I said, as a field guy in Gallup, New Mexico. That was my first job. A guy that I'm going to be traveling with tomorrow, be meeting in Los Angeles. He started out in our telecommunications center correcting addresses. I mean, literally there. And now he's been with us for, I think probably 30 years, almost 30 years, and manages our strategic programs department. So getting in, doing a great job. I mean, if you want to come in as the president of Right to Work, I'll challenge you if right out of college. But if you do your job, you take it seriously, you have a passion for it, and you love what you do, I mean, there are potential for growth, not only at Right to Work, but just on any job that you'd want to take.
And so I think about my career path, Mark, and I think about the opportunities that many of which were not job listings on conservativejobs.com, or I didn't find them in the classifieds. Have you had, or do you see among your staff those individuals or your experience where you have seen an opportunity just out of reach and it sort of materializes? How does someone like you or like somebody that you know identify the opportunity that is right for them at their stage in their career?
Yeah, I think you got to try. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, if things would have gone well, I will say, as I was out in the field, we lost a lot of times. We lost a lot of battles. We won the big ones. We lost a lot of small ones. And I guess if we had some success, that probably would have made a difference as I looked at the world. But the action level, the activity level, the ability to be involved in things like state legislation. I tell the interns at Leadership Institute, if you want to get involved in public policy, get involved in the state legislature because it happens like this. I mean, 30-day sessions, 60-day sessions, 90-day sessions, things are moving so quickly you can learn about things. Whereas here in Washington, D.C., we're, enough said. But that was kind of exciting to me, and being involved in being able to see the movement, being able to see the results in a short period of time is something that I think everyone wants in a job. I mean, you want to be able to see that you're making a difference, that your actions and your energy is making a difference. And if you don't love it, I think you probably know at some point. It may get old after a year or two, but I think when you get involved in something, you take a job, you're going to know pretty quickly, hey, is this something I want to do? And I think this, if you look at the arc of someone's regular career, I think they change jobs, 8 times in a career or something like that?
So now, yeah.
I'm not sure what the exact number is. Of course, I still have that ahead of me 7 times, but we'll see. But it's interesting. I think the people that end up working with us and staying with us, I mean, we have 2 attorneys that have been with us almost 50 years.
Wow.
We've got a cohort of another group of attorneys that have been with us for 20 or more. And I think you would do that not because the work's easy, but because you love what you do. And that makes all the difference in the world. And you can tell, I think you can tell, as you work someplace and you work with people and you see the kind of the esprit de corps that is in a employment opportunity, those things work. And so I would say, look for something. Don't be afraid to change if you don't like it. Don't be afraid to try something different if you don't like it. I think you have. I mean, growing up to getting through college, I've had lots of different things. And I think what I did know was I didn't want to do that. So that's why I went to college and said, okay, let me see if I can make myself a little bit better. I got a degree in finance, which was kind of interesting. I use that now that I'm, running the office and have to worry about payroll and insurance and all those other things, which is fun. And that goes back to my training in college. But I wouldn't trade that arc between 1986, leaving in my car the day after Christmas, driving across America to New Mexico, and what's happened since. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, that is super exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I think back to the beginning of my career, and it was during the first economic downturn of my life, the 2008, 2009 mortgage crisis and the bailout and TARP, and a lot of my friends went to law school. Essentially to delay adulthood, and people who've tuned into a couple of our programs know I'll get on a soapbox and talk about law school. If you want to go to law school, you should, but I would talk to a local attorney and see what they like about it and if they don't like it. Yeah. But I had that opportunity from Leadership Institute and I said I'd never lived further than 15 minutes from my parents. I went to college in my hometown. Yeah. And I said, let's see what happens. I'm going to move 660 miles away. And that was 16 years ago. And I go back to Nashville, and it feels like Las Vegas to me. It feels a little too much. And so I feel like I'm in the right place. And all of the opportunities that I've seen from Leadership Institute in 2009 to a state Senate race in 2010 to direct mail for that state Senate candidate's brother in 2011 to maintain a relationship with LI where I taught throughout that entire period, landing at a training organization like Leadership Institute for 6 years and then coming back. You never know. And I think it's important to keep your eyes open for those opportunities. And if it makes you a little uncomfortable, that's probably a good thing. It's probably okay. I remember I had this young man at a training, it was several years ago. I'm not going to tell too much about his story, but he was in a bad situation at home, and he said, I got to get out of here. And I said, okay, I've got a campaign job for you. And I said, but if you mess this up, I can never help you again. And he went up, I think, to Minnesota, and then he wound up in an adjacent state, could have been Wisconsin, knocking doors for an organization that we're friends with here. And his dad was out of the picture. Mom, she was going to go away for a while. And after that professional experience, he came back home, reunited with his mother, rebuilt that relationship, and then is now in law enforcement. And he's a successful. So he got a little bit of the campaign stuff out of the way, he got his life on track, and then came back. And I think it is in those moments that professionally could make us uncomfortable, a new opportunity, something we don't know, what the end of that looks like, and then we just go and check it out. And I think that's what I want people to think about. Now, you talk a lot about work, Mark, but you got a home life too. And I think post-pandemic, there is this increased focus on work-life balance, and I've written about it a number of times this year. But I want you to talk to the extent that you're comfortable about.
Yeah, Matthew, that's really important, and thank you for that. That's a great transition. It's something that I should have said we should talk about on the front end because, that home base, that secure home base is really essential, whether you go through difficult times or whether the grass is always green or whatever. And we know it's not always green. But having that and protecting that has been a high priority for me. For example, like I'll take off tonight, fly to Los Angeles, get there at midnight, have 2 meetings tomorrow, and fly back on the plane to get back so I can sleep in my own bed, be with my wife, and be with my kids. And I committed to that when I got married, almost 34 years ago now, that I would try to do that. And I have, and it's been difficult. But there's no place for us to be out there staying, going in a day early to meet a meeting and then staying a day later. I just tried to get home, and boy, making sure that base is secure, that takes care of a lot of things that happen in the workplace. It takes care of a lot of things that happen in life, if you can count on that. And I've been so blessed in that regard. My wife she's got better intuition than I do. She's a counselor. She keeps me in line. She keeps me busy on the weekends, I promise you. And having 6 kids was a beautiful thing too. I mean, I think one of the things we do, and it's funny, Christianity Today wrote a story about the revival of large families, and this idea that there were people having 5 or 6 kids. How dare them? And the premise of the story, Matthew, at the end of it was, well, at least you'll have health care. And I wrote back a letter to the editor thinking I would never get published, but it was real quick. I said, yeah, I appreciate all that, and that's fun and good, but I'll tell you the real reason why you have a lot of kids is because God knows you're selfish. And in order to get rid of most of the selfishness, he gives you a couple kids, and then he gives you a couple more. And I'll tell you what, selfishness goes away. Hopefully all of it. I still have a little bit of it, but it does. And having that experience and just watching that grow, and at this point now, thinking about my mom who's still alive, who's having some health issues now, but thinking about my kids and where they are now. I had 2 kids that work for the Leadership Institute. One of them was in the accounting office or the controller's office or whatever, and another was a field director. They're doing well now. They've kind of found out other things to do that they love. But keeping that home base and keeping that vow that you make, I mean, we make vows, to do the right thing at work. We make vows to do the right thing when we're paying bills or get a mortgage or buy a car, saying we'll repair it. But keeping your vow about that you stand up and look at someone in the eye and say, you're mine and I'm yours until death do us part, that's been just unbelievably a foundation of everything that I think I've done since then. So I can't say enough about that. And my wife is a saint, and I still have work to do. You
do have a great wife and great children.
Well, thank you.
We from time to time we have events, and 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 will show up, and it is really a testament, I think, to the living out your principles in a way, and your faith and your values that is so important. As we juggle, what pays the mortgage and what brings professional satisfaction, and then what back home completes us.
Yeah.
And Mark, it is awesome every time you come to an event and you've got some percentage of your family is with you, and they're fantastic. I do want to ask one more question about this, is because we're in an ideological or a philosophical industry. Right, you are working every day so that the American worker has more freedom over what he or she does, how much he or she takes home, what they're able to accomplish, and I'm out here training people to be hopefully successful employees wherever they wind up. How have you maybe passed that worldview or philosophy on to your children?
Yeah, the dinner table. We have made a point of, and that goes to my travel schedule, we made a point to have dinner. My wife has been so good about doing that and having all the kids at the table and going through issues of the day. I mean, they're following the news. Now, not so much. I had 5 of the kids are home this weekend. We were all at the table again. We got this big, long table that my wife and I sit at now that we're empty nesters, and it's kind of interesting. We're down at this little tiny corner, but last night, we looked at the whole table, and everybody but my daughter, who's at college right now in South Carolina, was there, and that was really, really fun. But we did talk about those issues. And then I think most importantly, Matthew, and this is important, I know you do this, you model it. You model it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be all verbalization and, hey, you'll do this, you do that. For example, one little thing that we did at the Mix household was every month we would have what's called Manor Night, and it was never on a predictable night. I would look at the table when all 6 kids were there. We would look, and at the end of the night, I would give you a silver coin, a silver bullion coin that's now worth like $50. Back at the time, I think it was maybe worth about $8. But I would give them the coin for the winner of Manor Night, and that meant, I think Helen Blackwell has the book about how you train your people to go out and visit with other people, and how to put their napkin in their lap and these kind of things. Those are so important too. Just kind of that structure. And it's not necessarily discipline, but it's structure and kind of creating an environment where we can have conversations, just by how what fork do you use, and that training is helpful anyway. But I think the dinner table was probably the most successful place for passing on those ideas and having disagreements, no doubt. I mean, kids that go to the government school system get their textbooks don't have anything about right to work.
Sure.
They talk about the unions and how great they are and all this Samuel Gompers stuff. And he was actually not bad too, because he believed in voluntary unionism. But you don't get this stuff. And so my ability to communicate that, to show them what I do, taking them to events like Leadership Institute, watching you work on July 4th. I mean, you're the busiest guy at the picnic.
I'm organizing.
You are. And watching that and showing your commitment, dedication. Those are things that are teachable moments that I think have made a difference in their lives. And I'm sure that I think we put all of them through the government school system. One of them is still in there, and they come out the other end with their head on straight still, I think, which is great. And because we talk about it. We do talk about it. And they're on our direct mail list too, by the way. So, yeah.
Make your most generous contribution of 25.
Yeah.
So shifting back to the career and to the important work that you're doing, I think a lot about just what comes next, and especially now. So again, I talk a lot about post-pandemic stuff and what the workplace looks like. What are some challenges either with day-to-day in the office work, or perhaps even with the issues that you guys are organizing and communicating around, that you see in the near future?
Yeah, well, Matthew, I think one of the things is that the Republic is never safe. I mean, there's not one moment in time where you can say, okay, we got that done. I will say that people of our philosophy, conservative people, generally will muster for the fight, and then we'll want to go back to our families. We'll want to go back and put the musket back over the door, as opposed, from a metaphorical standpoint, and just wait till, go on with our lives. The other side doesn't do that. The left this is it for them. This is their program. Expanding government power over our lives is something that's like that. So there's never a moment where you kind of like take a deep breath and say, we've done it, and we don't have to work that hard anymore. I mean, every day comes with a challenge to this, because it's not like they're sitting on the sidelines saying, okay, hey, we lost that battle, we're not going to fight it again. In fact, the right to work bill, I mean, the bills get introduced every year to repeal the right to work laws in various legislatures. And so every new cycle, every January, take accounting of what the legislature looks like. Get ready, plan a program, and begin to fight. So, I think just keeping the passion up, keeping the energy up, and understanding that if we're going to continue, I don't know, to say that we're at a point which is acceptable now and is going badly in the future is not true. We're not where we are. It's not acceptable where we are today from a standpoint of forced unionism, for sure, on our issue and other issues that people are involved in. But just staying ready for the fight and being available. And that's why the Leadership Institute work is so important, because you're putting new players on the field every year, and they're coming in fresh-faced and trying to figure out what they want to do, and maybe this is their career, will be. Many of them have chosen, the work that Leadership Institute trains them to do as a career. So just staying in the game is probably the most important part about it. So, after tomorrow, the election day in Virginia, again, not to time date this any way that I can help it, but it's likely that we're going to have a major battle in Richmond coming up in January if things don't go well. And so getting girded for that, getting our plans together, getting our team together, start working already on that next battle and being planners. I mean, I think, what is it, have a plan? Can you recite?
Well,
please.
Which
you can't win without a plan, or I forget what it is.
Well, planning is indispensable, but plans are useless. Is that
something like that?
We're going somewhere.
Yeah.
We're going
Mike Tyson
somewhere.
said it better. All plans go out the window when you get punched in the face.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was also thinking, as you were talking about what the fight looks like, or what the political struggle looks like. I believe it was Saul Alinsky who said the issue is never the issue is always the revolution.
Yes.
And so that is what I've noticed in 16 years of organizing for conservative causes, or just generally, particularly in a place like Deep Blue Arlington, is that there is a different, not a level of commitment, but the commitment to the fight. Knowing that the struggle is always ongoing, and for those on the left, and I think that was an important organizing principle for communists. And you read something like "Dedication and Leadership" by Douglas Hyde, and understand just how important they took the constant cycle of organizing. Yeah. And Mark, you live it in the sense that many people on the right. go to work, and of course you do much more than that, but then they go home and they're with their families, or they're planning for retirement, or they've trusted the politicians to do what they said they were going to do when they were on the campaign trail, and then they don't. And that's regardless of party, I think, in many instances. What are some of the things? So I want to look back over your 39 years at National Right to Work Committee and the Legal Defense Foundation, and identify some of the inflection points for you, professional successes where you said, hey, this was a really cool opportunity, or hey, we really achieved something here. Yeah,
well, obviously when you argue at the U.S. Supreme Court, winning a few of those is really kind of one of those moments where you say, wow, it made a difference. Let me take you back to 2018 with a guy by the name of Mark Janis. He was a child financial services person in the Illinois government working in Springfield, and he had the courage to stand up and say, I don't want to support a union that I disagree with on all fronts. And Mark Janis's courage led him to the federal court system opposing this, and led him to the United States Supreme Court, where literally one person's courage got them an argument in front of the highest court in the land. And we were privileged to be the attorneys that represented Mark at the court, argued the case. One of our attorneys argued the case at the U.S. Supreme Court. And on June 28, 2018, in the very last case decided that day, which is usually set for the most important case or the most controversial case of the court's term, I remember the first case came out and then the second term came out, and we won. And we won protections for every government employee in the United States of America to be free from being forced to pay dues or fees to a union in order to work for government. So basically every employee, whether it be at the local level, the city level, the county level, whatever it is, state level, is free to choose whether or not they want to financially support a labor union. That's the mission statement. That's a you're admitted stamp on your passport saying you've achieved that. I think the second one probably that has the most impact on me is passage of the right to work law in the state of Indiana back in 2012. It was very interesting because we had planned this after right to work passed in Oklahoma in 2001. We said, okay, what's next? Let's get into the so-called Rust Belt, the Great Lakes region, and let's get one there, because once you get one, it tends to radiate, which if you look at a right to work state map, you'll see it, the 26 states. Everyone says they're all in the South, but they're not 26 southern states, I promise you. There are some that maybe want to be, but they're not. But so Indiana we started from the very beginning. The kind of the foundation was there, the structure was there. Democrat governor, Democrat state house, Republican Senate. We sent a team in to look at it, to make an assessment about it. And I got to tell you, Matthew, this was probably from a textbook standpoint of what you're teaching at the Legislative Project Management School here.
Sure.
It got executed perfectly. It took us 4 election cycles to get it done. We had to fight the Republicans. We had to fight the Democrats. In fact, up until I think this last legislative session in 2025, we had the longest legislative walkout in American history. Was 2011 in Indiana when the Democrats left when the right to work bill was introduced. They left for 35 days.
Wow.
They left the state so that no quorum could be put together to do anything in the state house. And over the course of those 8 years when we were building, there were some great steps forward. There were some steps back. But ultimately, we got to the point where the right to work issue was a seminal issue. It was there on the marquee. It was the fundamental issue. I mean, 10,000 workers showed up protesting, getting into the Capitol. They had state police, the whole thing. They tried to upset the Super Bowl that was being played in Indianapolis that year. They marched through the Super Bowl Village or whatever that was called, and we're going to shut down the Super Bowl. And at the end of the day, it was the legislator said, look, and they actually introduced a compromise bill that we opposed, which they said, you'll never oppose this. You should take this little increment we're going to give you. He said, oftentimes people that ask for everything don't get anything. And we said, we're willing to accept that because we're here for the long run.
Oh, wow.
And finally they said, look, if we pass this bill, you guys will leave, right? Yeah, sure. We'll be gone. And to this day, there's a guy by the name of Jerry Torr who was the sponsor of the bill. We had a little bit of dust up with him about just some tactical issues because he's on the inside taking the heat from his colleagues, and we're just on the outside, lobbing shots in there. And he said, you guys don't come back. And so he was traveling. I think he goes to Florida now. He's retired. And a couple of years back, he called. We talked on the phone. I said, Jerry, can I come back? He goes, no, you can't. But there's been not a challenge to right to work since then. In fact, the union movement, the first year we passed right to work, the union actually grew because the union said, hey, we've got to go out and tell people they can join us and they can, we're doing these great things for them. And so we felt that was great. So there's been we passed 5 new right to work laws in that 10-year period from 2012 to 22. And that was a great accomplishment. And then 4 major Supreme Court cases during that same period. So if I had to think about it from a standpoint of, I've kind of forgotten about those victories because we got more ahead of us. But those are moments where the training, the preparation, and luck is determined by preparation and opportunity coming together. And preparation was a big part of that. And whether that be the training here, the kind of the elementary training that started at the Leadership Institute. I think I'm a graduate of almost all the schools you guys have. I don't have any pictures of politicians on my wall, but I got diplomas from the Leadership Institute. So that's been really something that's been very exciting to know when I finally, decide that I've had enough, or the good Lord says you've had enough. Looking back on that and seeing, these 4 major Supreme Court victories, seeing 5 new right-to-work laws being passed, that really is fun because those are impactful things. They're real, they're tangible, and they have an impact on the lives of Americans, and that's really exciting.
That is of all the people that I talk issues, and we've had Grover Norquist here, we've interviewed a number of people on different platforms, and you are so excitable about this issue, and this is exactly why I wanted to bring you into the studio and have this conversation. And you basically, you really radiate what it means to go out and care about an issue and really invest in achievement. Morton does say effort is admirable, achievement is valuable. And I think about, you think about some of those legislative battles and you didn't get something in one session, but you go back the next year and maybe you have an accountability measure in the election cycle.
We do. Good for you.
Yeah. So, it's particularly in the political action side. And so as we sort of wind down the last few minutes of this, I want you to think and sort of talk about what you think people who are looking to start a career, what are some of the most important tips or lessons that you've come away with in your career in public policy?
Yeah. Study the greatness of America. That, again, going back to reflecting on the times that I was traveling across the country with a suitcase, meeting people and doing projects, that was the most valuable because you put a cause or a reason for what you're doing. And, if you're just processing paper from one box to another, that may not be nearly as exciting. And so take a chance. Take a chance. Risk a little bit, especially when you're young and you have that chance. Once you get a couple of kids and a mortgage and a wife that wants you home at night, it's harder to take chances. So for when you're young, you're getting out of college, test a lot of things and try it and look for opportunities of things that you want to do and get trained and learn about things. I'm not a great reader, but I do read things that are, I get a lot of information on my desk at any given time that I have to read that's I'm responsible for. But read about history, read biographies, read things that are important. Leadership Institute has a read to lead list of books, and I recommend anyone go look at that and pull those books out and get a sense of what liberty and freedom look like and how it's progressed through the years through the written word by people that experienced it, like I have. Someday maybe I'll write a right to work book, and we had one in 2005 when our past president was retiring and moving on, and we put together some of the war stories that he had battled in the 60s and 70s, and it makes for really exciting reading. For politics, what is the Saturday commercial? I am only a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, unfortunately, that's not how the legislative process works. If you study it, and you'll find out that it's kind of like sausage. You don't want to watch it. But being involved in that and learning about that process is really, really essential to be really good in the public policy process. And then learning how to win. You know that. You promote that better than I do. Learning what you're fighting for and why it's important. And then taking a few risks and trying a few different things and see what sticks and see what you love.
It's excellent advice, and I got lost sort of in how a bill becomes a law, because I thought to myself, and I know that you've seen these fights. Well, we can have a voice vote in a subcommittee, and nobody knows who voted for it and who voted against it, or we could change the language in the bill on the floor, and then we trip people up. And there's so many legislative tricks and traps. And it is much easier to see them play out at the state legislative level. And I know that you guys see that at National Right to Work Committee all the time in states. I remember one of my first roommates up here was an employee of yours in 2009, late 2009, early 2010, and just passionate and fired up about confrontational politics. Yeah. He loved going to the state capitol and showing up and getting under the skin of the people who weren't engaging in honest conversation about public policy or who wanted to play the political games.
Yeah. Well, and like you, Matthew, everyone knows you're not, you're a wallflower. You're the guy that stands. No, it's good to be out there and be involved in that process and testify and organize and mobilize and do those things that make a difference in public policy. And it's been a real great experience for me, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad to have a chance to talk to you about it. I've made a lot of mistakes. We've made mistakes. We correct those mistakes, but we continue to learn from those mistakes how we do it better and how we get better at it. And then when you get a few victories here and there, it feels really, really, really good.
That's
Indeed.
awesome. Well, Mark, it is great to be with you. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Mark Mix from National Right to Work Committee and the Legal Defense Foundation. My name is Matthew Hurt. You have been watching What Do You Do? Conversations in Public Policy, and we will see you next time.